Welcome back to the Unlock English podcast, the show that helps you take your English to the next level without all the stress and confusion. I'm Quinn.
And I'm Miley. Today, we've got an exciting episode about a game-changing concept that will make your English learning smarter and much more efficient.
That's right. We're talking about the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle. Ever heard of it? It's the idea that 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts.
And today, we're going to show you how to apply that rule to learning English. Because let's face it, there's a lot to learn. And we want to help you focus on what truly matters. So let's break down what the 80-20 rule actually means. It was first introduced by an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto. He discovered that, in most situations, 80% of results come from just 20% of efforts. For example, 80% of a country's wealth might be owned by 20% of its people. Or in a business, 80% of sales come from just 20% of clients.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? And when it comes to learning English, we can apply this principle to focus on the most important 20% of the language that will help you get 80% of the results. You don't need to memorize every single word or understand every grammar rule to be fluent.
Exactly. So today, we'll talk about how to focus on the right 20% of English to make your learning faster and more effective. Let's start by identifying which 20% is really important.
When it comes to language learning, the key is to focus on the most commonly used words and phrases. That's the 20% that will give you 80% of what you need to communicate in everyday conversations.
Think about it this way. High-frequency words are used everywhere in English. If you learn the 1,000 most common words, you'll be able to understand 80% of daily conversations. That's a pretty big chunk of communication for just 1,000 words.
And here's the cool part. When you learn these words, you'll also start to see common patterns, making it easier to understand the rest of the language. So, focusing on this small group of words is going to give you big results.
Right. You don't need to know every single word in the dictionary. By mastering those high-frequency words, you're already ahead. And what's great is that these words will pop up everywhere, in movies, podcasts, daily conversations, you name it.
Now, let's not forget about grammar. A lot of people get bogged down by all the rules, but the truth is, basic grammar is all you really need to be understood. For example, verb tenses are a huge part of communication. You need to focus on the essentials. 1. Verb tenses, present, past, and future. 2. Simple prepositions, in, on, at, for, with. 3. Basic sentence structures, like subject plus verb plus object.
Exactly. Once you get the hang of these basic structures, you'll start to feel comfortable speaking and understanding English, even with a small vocabulary. And remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. People will understand you as long as you focus on the essentials.
That's right. Another tip is to focus on phrasal verbs, which are used all the time by native speakers. These are verbs combined with prepositions or adverbs, and they can change the meaning completely.
Yep. Things like pick up instead of collect, give up instead of quit, and turn off instead of switch off. These are much more common in everyday conversations than their formal counterparts. So, make phrasal verbs a priority in your learning.
Plus, phrasal verbs make you sound more like a native speaker. For example, turn off feels more natural than switch off. And the good news is, once you get used to them, they'll start to feel like second nature.
So, don't waste time trying to memorize every word or rule. Focus on the 20% that you'll hear the most, and you'll see massive improvements in your speaking and listening abilities. Plus, these high-frequency words and phrasal verbs will help you feel more confident when talking to native speakers.
Now that we know what the important 20% is, the next question is, how do we apply it in our daily English practice? Let's dive into some practical techniques that will help you use the 80-20 rule effectively.
First off, you need to prioritize listening and speaking. These two skills will give you the most value in real-life situations. You don't need to be fluent in writing or reading right away. What matters is how well you can communicate verbally.
Absolutely. For example, you can start by listening to podcasts or watching English movies. This helps you hear those common words and phrases in context, making it easier to absorb them.
And don't forget about music. Listening to English songs can also be a fun way to reinforce what you're learning while enjoying your time. Plus, songs often use simple vocabulary and repetition, which is perfect for language learning.
But the key is, don't just listen, actively engage with the material. Pause and repeat phrases you hear in podcasts, movies, or music. Try mimicking the accents and pronunciation. This is a great way to build confidence and fluency.
Yes, and don't be afraid to speak. Speaking is crucial if you want to practice what you've learned. Even if it's just for a few minutes a day, try to speak in English every day.
You can start with a language partner or even practice with yourself in front of a mirror. Or if you're shy, use apps like Tandem or HelloTalk to connect with other learners. The more you speak, the more natural it'll feel.
And here's a pro tip. Use language learning apps that focus on conversation practice. Apps like Duolingo, Babbel, and Memrise are fantastic for listening and speaking skills. These apps use real-world content that's focused on those high-frequency words we talked about.
Exactly. By practicing speaking, you're reinforcing that 80% of language that you'll need to communicate effectively. And you don't need to wait until you're fluent to start speaking. Just start now, and you'll improve over time.
Also, don't neglect reading and writing. They're still important, but you don't need to prioritize them in the beginning. Focus on listening and speaking, and once you're comfortable with that, then you can build up your reading and writing skills.
Yep. The beauty of the 80-20 rule is that it helps you prioritize the skills that'll have the biggest impact on your fluency and communication, allowing you to focus on what truly matters.
Now let's talk about making your study sessions as effective as possible. It's not about how long you study. It's about how focused and intentional your study sessions are.
That's right. For example, rather than spending 2 hours memorizing vocabulary, try spending 30 minutes actively listening to a podcast in English, writing down useful phrases, and then repeating them aloud.
And you can track your progress using a language journal. Write down the new words or phrases you've learned and review them regularly. You'll be surprised how quickly you can see results by focusing on the 20% that matters.
Exactly. Use flashcards for new vocabulary and don't forget to focus on the most common words and expressions. Flashcards can help you remember what you've learned in a fun and interactive way.
Another important thing when applying the 80-20 rule is repetition. Your brain needs to hear something multiple times before it sticks.
You've probably heard the saying, practice makes perfect. When you repeat words and phrases over and over, you start to internalize them.
So, make it a habit. Spend 10 to 15 minutes every day reviewing what you've learned. It doesn't have to be long, but consistency is key to making progress.
Now let's talk about goals. One of the best ways to stay on track with the 80-20 rule is by setting smart, specific goals.
Right. Instead of saying, I want to be fluent in English, try setting clear milestones like, I want to understand 80% of a movie without subtitles in 3 months. Or, I want to have my first full conversation in English with a native speaker by the end of the month.
These goals are clear, measurable, and will give you the motivation to keep going. And the beauty is, you can achieve them by focusing on the 20% of English that's the most useful in real-life conversations.
So, there you have it. The 80-20 rule is all about working smarter, not harder. Focus on the 20% of English that will help you get 80% of the results you want.
Start by mastering the most common words and phrases, focusing on listening and speaking, and making your study sessions short and effective. Remember, it's not about how much you learn. It's about learning what matters most.
So, get started today. Apply the 80-20 rule and start making huge progress in your English journey. We'll see you next time on the Unlock English podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe and happy learning.